So I often describe myself as a third culture kid. Even though I'm an Indian by ethnicity, I didn't grow up in India. I grew up everywhere else but there. I grew up in Egypt, in Dubai, in Iraq, in Australia. My welcome to America was Queens, New York, Tampa, Florida, Edison, Jersey, lived in California. And this wide experience of having moved through cultures and countries and continents, it gave me from a very young age an understanding about the world and how we connect as human beings across cultures. And so much of who we become starts in childhood. So to me, it's no coincidence that my world took me into psychology and understanding of human behavior and my mission to helping people realize how much we have in common. My guest today, Kristen, is the founder and the host of Culture Kids Production, a multiple award-winning nonprofit and family podcast helping children embrace a multicultural mindset. As a Korean American mother of two and a solo producer working alongside her son, Asher, Kristen has created a platform that brings authentic voices, traditions, and experiences from around the world into homes and classrooms. Her background in TV production at places like CBS Sports, NBC Sports, Discovery Networks, and Eurosport gave her the tools to bring the vision to life. But it's her personal mission to make sure kids everywhere feel seen, celebrated, connected to a global community that drives it. In this conversation, we'll talk about why early cultural education matters, not just for kids, but for how it ripples into their families. And through that, we create a true multicultural understanding. Because let's be real, in the day and age that we live in today, we can't escape the fact that we are living in a very diverse place. And we'll explore what it could mean to raise a generation that sees differences not as barriers, but as bridges to deeper human connection. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives, the podcast where we challenge traditional thinking and explore the power of empathy in conscious leadership, personal growth, and human connection. I'm Dr. Payal Beri, and in each episode, we dive into thought-provoking conversations that expand perspectives and spark transformation. Because empathy reframes perspectives. Let's begin. Kristen, this conversation is so important. We already live in a world that is so connected. Then why are we not teaching our kids on how to engage with that interconnectedness? So I love what your mission around Culture Kids has been. But of course, as always, I want to start at the beginning and I want to understand your story and what it is about your story as an immigrant, your story growing up that rooted you building Culture Kids.
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me and giving Culture Kids space and time to share our story. I mean, there's just so many different elements of how the show and the production came together along with the nonprofit organization. But speaking from kind of like a deeply personal experience, I was born in South Korea, immigrated here, maybe, was it 7 or 8? Second grade.
Yeah.
And I think that my immigration story with my family, typical American immigration story in the 90s. And there were a lot of great memories, but there were also a lot of memories where I guess like trying to learn English and trying to integrate myself socially. I felt that, again, very common experience for not just immigrants, but for people that are practicing different religions or cultures at home, that we live this like double life, right? And I think it still happens as adults as well, right? In the workplace as well. But this double identity where we feel like as soon as we walk into the classroom or into the office, we kind of shift and hide really parts of ourselves that makes us who we are. Whether it's the food that we eat, right, for children especially, or the language that we speak, or mannerisms and how we perceive the world. We tend to kind of shift into this new identity. And I felt this shift and the sense of like having dual personalities almost, right? It feels that way from a very early age. And over time, I felt that when I did present anything that was whether Korean or things that I practiced at church, whatever it was, oftentimes it was met with bullying, right? It wasn't met with this warm, welcoming embrace that we were able to experience, I guess, later on when we were not in situations like that. But I noticed that even now, it happens a lot in our classrooms, right, for our children. I have a 8-year-old who's actually the co-host of Culture Kids. and a 5-year-old as well. And even just simple situations, whether it's in soccer team or whether it's in the classrooms, they share stories like that, right? And after my daughter was born, March 2020 in New York City, with my husband working in healthcare, seeing COVID patients, it was a very difficult time. And obviously, we all know there was a lot going on in our country at that time. And it was just this desire to want to do something, right? But also being home with like a 3-year-old and a newborn at that time. With my TV production background and my understanding of how productions come together, it all just kind of slowly came together over, I think, like 2 years or something. And we launched in October 2022. And one topic that really kind of drove me to put this together through all this craziness was like, I mean, it's a small thing, but like Lunar New Year, for example. Just, I had this big passion to educate and share about how different countries around the world celebrate Lunar New Year, right? Because I think the understanding is that, especially in America, there's just this one way to celebrate it. And I remember just thinking about that, but like, what if there's a platform that we can share, not just within our neighborhood, neighbors, or just within my son's school at that time? What if there was a platform where we can share how Koreans or Vietnamese and of all the different communities in China celebrate it, which is just so diverse and so different. And yeah, over time, it just kind of snowballed and grew into what it is now. And it's just been such an incredible journey and life-changing for our whole family. So,
Wow. I love the way that you talk about the part of relating it to like what you went through immigrating here. And again, the empathy that you have in making sure that your son and daughter and everyone else is like, well, how do they have an opportunity to learn without having to hide themselves? And I think that happens a lot to immigrant children. I know for me as well, moving here in the 90s and as a third culture kid where I didn't grow up in India. I grew up in the Middle East, and then we moved to the US. And so there was this extra layer of having to claim multiple parts of who I am and having to then experience that. But I think that talking about what you just touched on about Lunar New Year is there's this also component, which I love that you're doing, which is also helping communities realize that we're not monolithic and that there is so much richness and diversity within even this grouping that happens. That yes, there is this overarching cultural thing about Asians, but you know what? Like as a South Asian immigrant, me and my friend whose parents are Nigerian but are immigrants, we share so much similarity. We can laugh for hours about the things that we had to experience as immigrant kids versus what maybe some of my friends who are second generation South Asian that grew up here could understand. So
totally.
I think that the layers that you're touching on are not just about like, here's Asian culture, or here's like South American culture. It's really going into the nuances of what it just means to be a kid that holds multiple identities.
Totally. I mean, yeah, you brought up a really great point about our mission. We don't just learn about differences, right? Our main goal is for children to form friendships across different cultures, borders, whatever it is, right? And that every child, whether they're immigrants or not immigrants, or they've never left their home city, they have something amazing that they can share and teach us, right? However, they celebrate a certain holiday or a fun family tradition that's been passed down for generations, whatever it is. And that's what our ultimate mission is, right? To help children realize that friendships can be formed in any angle, and that despite all these differences, no matter how we celebrate whatever and how we practice a certain religion, that there's grounding similarities across everything.
I think that you're touching on so much about curiosity and how to almost like build curiosity. I mean, kids are already naturally curious. And I think that
Yeah.
as adults, we suffocate and suppress the curiosity in us out of just there's too many layers that we now have to filter. But as kids who are just naturally curious, it's almost like you're asking them to encourage that part of themselves. And I remember growing up where I would feel like really embarrassed to bring Indian food to school. And I would be like, oh, why can't I just get one of those like Lunchables or like
I know.
sliders,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
But I
All I
see
wanted
my
was an Lunchable.
Lunchables with like
Yeah.
the candy surprise snack. And on the other hand, I see my niece who's 11, where every Friday she has my mom, her grandmom, like make this Indian paranta for her that she takes to school. And then her friends want it, and even her teachers get it like, oh, like that's so good. And my mom started making extra for the principal's office because
Wow.
they wanted it. Right. And it was just such a difference in the fact that she feels so confident in being able to bring her culture to school without being made fun of or ridiculed, but just embrace it. And I wonder how much your thought is that when a kid embraces their culture and brings it confidently into the school, how much does that also influence other kids being receptive to it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the mindset that we're trying to cultivate and encourage, right, with children. Because somewhere down the line, and I want to explain this idea that we ground our mission statement in before we continue. It's called the compound effect. So it's a book actually by Darren Hardy where it talks about it's a really simple idea that little consistent actions over a given period of time leads to great results, right? Meaning you're not gonna get a six pack by working out at the gym like once a week or once a month, right?
Right.
You do it every single day over a long period of time, and then you see the great results. And that is kind of what we took Culture Kids' mission statement into, in that when we cultivate cultural education in a positive, uplifting, fun, and sometimes silly way, but rooted in authentic voices from the communities, this will help us raise a generation of children that are collaborative, open-minded, and that are willing to make friendships across different cultures and stay curious and adventurous. Now, conversely, we do have to take a second to talk about what happens when that doesn't happen, which is kind of what's happening in our public education system, right? In that when children are not exposed to cultural education from a very early age, meaning that multicultural mindset that I just mentioned, then what happens? Then this lack of education leads to lack of knowledge. The lack of knowledge leads to lack of understanding. That understanding could potentially lead to ignorance. And we all know what ignorance leads to: fear. Root of hate is fear, right? So we're trying to break that harmful cycle, and which is why we formed this nonprofit and to really focus on the field of education. And I think, that mindset of that having in the classroom, right, where a teacher presents all this information in this positive, uplifting way, where it's like, of course it's part of our world. Of course it's part of our country and our society and our city, because, whether you want to avoid it or not, no matter what you feel about the or everything happening in our country, like one thing you can't ignore is that our children, no matter where they live, are going to be raised in a multicultural society. Like that is an unstoppable thing, no matter how you feel about education or DEI. They're going to grow up no matter what job they have, right?
Right. They're going
They're
to interact with other people of other cultures, of other races.
exactly.
And how do you then create a space where you don't see that by people existing, it encroaches in your own space? Like that's not
Exactly.
a thing.
And
Yeah.
I think for some reason, instead of like, oh, we're gonna protect our kids from learning about this, but just as a compound effect that I discussed, if we start this education in a positive, uplifting way that's informative, that creates curiosity, a sense of adventure, like what would that world look like, right? If every child in this world had that kind of education from the beginning. And there's a lot of countries that do implement it, right?
What would be an example of that?
Well, one of the episodes that really blew me away, not episodes, but learning about cultures, especially in like country like Tanzania, for example, right? I had the privilege of meeting different people as we're trying to do certain episodes in Tanzania. We did one about food, very general, and then we had a guest who wrote a children's book featuring the culture of Tanzania. And a lot of times we talk with our guests offline and just hearing about, like, it's one of my dream places to visit someday because our guest was telling us, I actually added this part on our episode, but she's like, I'm Christian, but during Ramadan, it's like, whose house are we going to today for iftar? Right? And she's like, it's just such a mix of cultures and religions, and kids learn about it from an early age. And I wasn't exposed to that because Korea does tend to be a little bit of a monoculture, right, country. Like everyone speaks Korean or English there, right? And yeah, the culture within, especially like in the cities, it tends to be very singular. But it's just such a fascinating way. And like Nigeria, for example, we just did an episode about Nigeria. There's like hundreds of languages and cultures there, right? But it's what makes the country and the people thrive, and the people so loving, and they're able to thrive within that. And so a lot of countries out there, I'm not saying it's picture perfect, but right, and that's why I love learning about it, because I love hearing about what their childhood was like to have that, be raised in a community with that multicultural mindset. So
Yeah, growing up in Egypt, I went to a school that was specifically for expat kids. And so the kids that were in our classes, I mean, I still remember my first grade where one of my friends, her father was an archaeologist who got to spend the night in the pyramids in the Queen's Chamber. And we had Egyptian kids in there, we had Japanese kids in there, we had Caribbean, like it was mixed. And so there was International Day where the parent and a kid does like a fashion show. And so everyone comes dressed in their cultural clothes, and then everyone brings their culture of origin food. And so, growing up with that was such a core part of like my upbringing, and to the point where when we moved to the US and kind of got settled in, I remember finding it the opposite way as everybody else, where I thought that everyone ate different cuisines every night in their house. Like one night's Italian, the other night's seafood. Like I didn't grow up in a house where I only ate Indian food. Like every day was something different. So I thought everyone was like that. And it wasn't until and especially as kids, right? Like you go over to other people's homes and you grow up as a young kid thinking that the way your home is the way everyone else's home is. And then when you start interacting, then you realize, oh, wait a second, that's not what it is. But us as kids of the 80s and 90s, right, we had that in-person piece where I feel like what you're talking about is that there's so much already interconnectedness because of technology for the kids of today that they're already learning and experiencing interculture connectedness if you want it or not. So how can you intentionally and consciously create space for it?
yeah, that's a really great question. And actually, it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time with having kids as well. And I think there's a bit of a tension when it comes to cultural education, especially in America, because I think sometimes cultural education can present itself as like a culture is only applicable for people that practice a certain religion or come from or immigrants or right. But we need to present cultural education in a way that where it makes every child in the room feel safe, right? And feel like they belong, right? And so I love working with very young kids because for them, I just love seeing their, minds open when they feel and they know that they're in a safe, warm, inviting space. So I think that's primary, right? That's very important to be able to establish that at a very young age. And of course, there's parts of history that they do have to learn about eventually, right? But in our show, because our age range is so young, about 4 to 8 years old, like every guest is very like, oh my goodness, yeah. And we try to frame parts of history that in a way that is very safe and inviting for our youngest listener, which is like 4 years old.
I love that because what you're talking about, you're right. Like so much of the things that are just negative that are going on in history, we learn that because the news loves negative history, right? So they're going to focus on trauma and all those things, which is important to hold on to. But what I'm hearing and what I love is that you're talking about, yes, there's all those things that we have to learn at some point when we're at an age where we can maturely accept and understand it. But in that, we can't forget the beauty of these different cultural elements and traditions and what we can take from it and celebrate.
Absolutely. And so all of our guests, really, that's their primary focus, right? We did, I hope it's okay to share this, Anna, if you're listening. But we did an episode with this just incredibly talented, amazing journalist based in Bay Area. She has a podcast called Folk Tales of Sudan for Kids, where she like talks about, folk tales from Sudan, like in her very, 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 very engaging radio show host voice. And we had her on the show. And one of the things she mentioned was like, we really want to be celebrated, the Sudanese communities worldwide, because right now there's so much hardship. Obviously, there's so much going on in our world and in the communities back home. And obviously, we need to acknowledge that, right? But she's like, I want the focus of this episode to be a celebration of our communities, and like that just really made me tear up. And we crafted the episode so that Asher was like, oh, I want to go visit Sudan, right? And I was like, well, actually, right, there's a lot of things happening there right now. But and this was all Miss Hannah's idea. She was like, but we can also talk about how there's so many amazing, wonderful people that are helping, which is really true, right? And she's like, how can we empower children to want to help, right? To want to learn more about who we are as people in our culture, right? Because she's like, there is so much beauty and there's so much that children can learn from, right? So yeah, that's kind of been our focus given our age range. Obviously, if this show was for like middle school or high schoolers, it would be very different. But we want children to just marvel at how diverse and amazing this world is, right? That they prioritize even as 5-year-olds, that one day I'm going to grow up and travel to this place, right? Why not? Right? They may not be
Yeah.
able to travel with their families right now, right? Because obviously not all families are able to travel, but to prioritize that or to make friends and be curious about becoming friends with someone because X, Y, and Z, that they're able to
Yeah.
teach you something different and exchange ideas. And
Yeah.
one more thing is that I had a friend, a family friend, who was like very against having these like culture week, like international week at their son's preschool or kindergarten. And I asked why. It's like, why? Like, there's so much they can learn from it. And she said, because my child comes home feeling left out, like they don't have something that they can share, right? And that actually really touched my heart because as young kids, right, like everything shifts, right? Everything we do have to kind of think back and globally, not get triggered because they're innocent children, right? They're like
Yeah.
4, 5, 6 year olds. And I think that is so important, especially when we're talking about cultural education in America. So what we've been trying to do is to help kids realize, like I talked about before, your family is your culture too, right? Like we want to know how you celebrate your birthdays. Like, so we've done tons of
Right.
episodes about, tons, sorry, I meant, I think only 2 episodes about birthdays, or just family traditions can happen anywhere, anytime within you. You can be the first person to start a tradition, right? And let's talk about American cities, neighborhoods, right? Every neighborhood even in California is so different, right? And every
Right.
neighborhood has its own culture and own look and style.
Yep.
So one of the things we want to focus on next year is to talk about the cultures in American cities, right? We've
Oh,
already
that's
kind of
beautiful.
yeah, we've kind of done that with New York City already. Like I want to do
Oh,
like all the different like Brooklyn and like we've done one
yeah.
in Hell's Kitchen, Fide, but even go deeper, right, into like Florida, different, cities,
Mm-hmm.
Wyoming. We're trying to do an episode right now with like this winter sports that people love to do in Montana. We're trying to book our guests right now. So we want children to see culture in that light, right?
I really love how you talked about creating culture education and that space where every kid feels included. And that makes so much sense when so much of culture and when we talk about culture education is highlighted specifically about immigrant cultures or Native Americans or just whoever, like it's always about this. Then it's like, what happens to individuals that are like 10th generation American and they don't have, like, they may know that, yeah, my DNA says I'm part,
Yeah.
you know, Polish and part German, but they're full-blood American. And so
Totally.
what does it look like then when you talk about that every kid should feel like they have something to contribute? What does that look like then for someone who may not have a direct understanding, a lineage of some other part of the world, but like we're here
Totally.
and they're an American and they don't have that part of that we normally associate with? What does that look like for them to feel included?
Oh my gosh, yeah. No, I love this question because I think there's so many ways to encourage conversations at home, right? Many episodes really we do this like call to action, kind of like, oh, like what do you think, right? There's an outro at the end of every episode, and sometimes we'll have like very specific call to action, like for kids to engage with their parents, and a lot of them is like, are there any fun stories in your family, right? That maybe your parents know about, whether it's your grandparents or a town that your mom or dad grew up in, right? What are some fun stories that you can share? And there's so many ways. I mean, like in our family, yes, we're Korean American. I was born in Korea. My husband is Korean, but majority of our family culture right now is sports. Like
Right. Oh yeah,
our
that's right. Your
whole,
husband with the big umbrella.
oh my, yes, sorry. Yeah, my husband bought this enormous giant tent that I'm very embarrassed about using at all my son's
I
soccer
love
games,
it.
right? But our family, like, if there's one thing my son wants to talk about that he's so passionate about is like soccer and basketball, right? Like, that's our family culture. And I think that if we were to do a presentation about something special about that we do on the weekend, I think it would actually be that because that's where we spend majority of our time, right?
Yeah.
And I want children to realize that, and obviously it's different, right? But at the same time, there's so many things that you can share about traditions that you do within your family. Christmas traditions, right? Like we have a friend who they don't identify with a specific culture, but they wanted to be on the show because they wanted to share about what they do for Christmas, right? Which is like hiding like pickles. And we realized that that actually comes from it's a little bit of a complicated story, but there is culture behind it and history behind this fun thing that people do. And whatever it is, our next door neighbor, we're going to be doing this for Lunar New Year. They're from Seattle, and they were telling me about this tradition that their neighborhood has started where they hide like homemade like glass blown objects and depending on what animal it is for Lunar New Year, right? Whether you celebrate it or not, they'll if it's the year of the snake, they'll make these like snake glass things and they'll hide it all over the neighborhood, and the
Oh
entire
wow.
neighborhood wakes up at like 5 in the morning to go look for them.
Oh
And
my God,
that's
that's
part of their
amazing.
Lunar New Year. I was like, let's do an episode on that. That's
That's
amazing, right?
amazing. I
And
mean, that's so true. Like, it's again, if I think about, for example, we didn't celebrate Thanksgiving before we came to the US,
yeah,
right? And now it's like this is a Thanksgiving has become like such a big part of our traditions and what we do as a family. And I can imagine that it's like, even thinking about that, like you mentioned with Christmas or Thanksgiving or for whatever tradition you have, it's like your family may have a specific decor that you use every year, or there may be a specific like home that it's every year this person hosts that specific event because it's like that's where the tradition started, that's where it's going to be. So it's just like everyone's got something about tradition and culture that could be rooted in this. It actually is bringing up, I just did an interview and an episode with this woman named Annika Chabra, where she has a company called Roots and Seeds. And her entire focus is on questions that you can ask as kids and as adults, ask each other about understanding your ancestry, your legacy, your traditions, and culture, and how you can really embrace the pieces that you want and what are the pieces that you're going to take forward with you. So, I mean, that episode is just, it's all about ancestry and stuff. It's amazing. But she talks a lot about the things that you're talking about of like, how do you take from what you have, but also create, like, you're gonna there's culture in terms of like ethnicity culture, and then there's culture in terms of family culture, and then the neighborhood you live in, and
Exactly.
so much of that plays a role too. Like, no two Indians are the same families in the
Mhm.
same way. And so that's so interesting. I'm curious from to know though, like, so these kids are learning these things. These kids are growing and understanding and getting excited about all these different places. How does that influence their families? How does these kids learning about all the things that they're learning, them getting curious, them becoming more open, how have you seen this influence then their family or even their communities?
Yeah, that's like a very, it's like a quantitative versus qualitative, right?
Yeah.
Metrics. But we hear from our listeners a lot, parents a lot, especially, right? And saying that, like, oh, this episode, one common thing is like, we went to go try sushi for the first time because, of your episode. Or my son, we just did the soy sauce episode. We had the president of Sanjay soy sauce, like Tamari soy sauce, on the show, and one of the parents was like, "Oh, like my son's like literally never dipped their food in soy sauce, but they did at the same time." So obviously, I just hope that it's inspiring family adventures, right? And that these children will start forming friendships across communities, and that will influence parents' friendships as well, right? So just connecting, creating bridges, that's all we're trying to do, and friendships, and just more understanding. And I think that's so critical at this age, right, when their brains are still forming and they're still trying to make sense of the world. And all of the other history and things that they need to learn about obviously will come in due time, but we want them to be curious to learn more. But yeah, I think just hearing from parents, one parent was like, "Oh, we booked our vacation to LA because we did an episode about like shaved ice, right?" And so they wanted to try different types of shaved ice. Where they were at in the US, like there wasn't any options for that, but they booked their vacation to Los Angeles to be able to try shaved ice in like Koreatown and Chinatown and Little Tokyo, and they were very excited about that, and that truly touched my heart. And just adventures, right? Adventures with the family. That's just that, cultivating that mindset as a family unit.
I mean, so many times, right? If you think about it, kids watch something and then they like will not stop pestering their parents about it. Like over like parents are hoping that, oh, they're gonna forget because they're young and they're like just distract them and they'll forget about it in a few days. But it's like, nope, they don't stop because it's like they want this. And the fact that it can influence a family to travel and to go somewhere that they wouldn't have otherwise experienced. I can imagine that because kids of that age are watching that, that means parents are watching it because they want to make sure, of course, what their kids are watching. And so just by default, the parents who may not have ever had that chance or opportunity to learn themselves are now also getting exposed to this, or the kids coming home and asking questions to their parents of like, well, so how come this happens over here and we don't do it, right? And so it's like, then even that conversation of being able to like talk about being what it's like to be in community with, and also still see the fact that like, yeah, like we're not them and these are the traditions that we have and that's why, but we can celebrate that. So just creating those layers for the parents.
Totally. No, it's a huge privilege what we get to do, and a platform for the community. We're just curating content that our guests want to talk about, right? Most of our episodes are collaborations. The ones that aren't, it's just because lack of bandwidth. And then, so Asher and I end up talking about cultures that we practice at home, which is we're Korean American. So yeah, it's a huge privilege what we do, and absolutely love it.
What are some of the misconceptions you think that you often hear about raising global awareness? Why is it that culture education is looked on as this extra thing and it's not considered a critical education piece?
That's a really great question. And coming from personal experience as well, I think that there's a lot of fear. Obviously, there's fear in what we don't know, right? But I think for a
Right.
lot of parents, the fear is that I grew up in like a strict Baptist Christian family, and the fear is that, like, if you learn about another religion or you know too much about what the world is like that you will neglect your identity and not become Christian anymore, not want to go to church. I think that fear is global and I think that fear is real. There's a lot of studies to debunk this. When children learn about different cultures and religion, right? And when they have more access to diversity, like not only does it raise their intelligence or their social emotional intelligence, right? Which I'm sure you could agree it's very, very, very important indicator of a child's success in many things, not just academics, but there's just so many benefits. And I find that it reaffirms their identity more than ever. Like we are not a church, hope it's okay sharing a personal,
Yeah.
like a family situation, but we don't go to church every Sunday. But Asher and I, through working through these episodes, and we do a lot of episodes about religious holidays, and he asks a lot of questions about what we believe in as a family, right? So
Mm.
the way we phrase a lot of things is like, this is not the way we practice our faith in our family, but we love learning about how so and so practices their faith. And that was an episode that we worked on with Sikh Coalition, right? Like where they talked about wearing turbans and pakas. And we, Asher was like, oh, well, like we don't wear headgears in Christianity or our religion. And I'm so glad that he kind of like mentioned that as we're working on the episode because it gave me the opportunity to talk about, well, in the religion that we practice at home, which is Christianity, there are some groups out there, many, many, many Christians out there that wear head coverings, right? There's some churches that require head coverings to walk into mass or whatever, right? Tons. And he was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And I was like, it's just something that we don't practice in our family, but every family is different. And so now I feel that that's helping my son, especially as he's 8, kind of feel more empowered to embrace his identity for who he is and in that it's okay to be different. Like it's okay to say like that's not for me, but that's great that you're doing it. It's not how we practice it in our family. And it's something that I feel like it's like we keep saying it at home. Every family's different. Every family's different. Like, yes, some families will play this game, but in our family right now, we're not going to, and that's okay. And he seems to understand that's just how things are, and I think that's a wonderful lesson to teach children at a young age. But that fear and that misconception is there, but I really like to believe that it's changing. I really like to believe that with so many heightened emotions right now about differences, I think people are realizing that we have no choice but to embrace it now.
Hmm.
We have to as a society or we're not gonna last much longer, right?
No,
Like
it's so true. I mean, I agree. Like, I think that when you have something that is rooted in fear that is stopping you from or preventing you and your kids from learning and understanding, I then question that how then secure are you in your beliefs? Because if you feel secure and anchored into your beliefs and you're rooted into it, then you know that by exposing your kids or exposing community to other things isn't then a attack or isn't a response or a minimizing of yourself. It's a recognition that I also exist in this beautiful world where it's like, here's my slice and here's where we exist as a family. Here's how we exist. And how amazing is it that there's also all these other rich fabrics and colors and flavors and spices and everything that also exist. And to your point, it's that, for example, and I consider myself an example of this, where I'm never grew up in India. You know, I moved 15 times before I was 10. And that never took away the fact that I love Bollywood. I love Indian dancing. I love, like, I was never trying to be all of those things. But what I loved and I take pride in is that us moving around as much as we did gave me a view of the world. At the end of the day, when you're getting plopped from one school to the next school and one country to the next country, and you're like, how do I navigate these kids? I mean, the secret language, the love language of a kid is just give them some candy and they'll be your friend, right? So that didn't matter if they were in Australia or if they were in Egypt or if they were here in New York City. Like it was like I brought some candy to school, people became my friend and we were good. Like it was just that was the love language of children. And so it just gave me that yes, there were things that definitely went through, but it didn't take away my identity of like being rooted as a South Asian. But I will say that even if it shifted my perspective where like I'm not necessarily a religious person, but my mom is. And there's ways that I still embrace experiences, culture, and with every generation, they're going to take what they want and they're going to leave what they don't want. But the beauty of understanding culture of different places is just like that finding of that common ground is there's I have friends where they're Nigerian and Christian and who are able to connect better to maybe an American Christian than they are to another Nigerian who may be Muslim, like, right? Like or like the Muslim friend and the Christian friend connect deeply on the Nigerian culture part. Like it's just like we don't have to be so insulated into defining ourselves as this like one thing. Like it can be just the way that we make friends. Like I've got friends that are entrepreneurs that understand me better than my friends who are 9-to-5ers. My 9-to-5er friends I have a different bond with them than the other friend. So ultimately kind of getting to that point of the beauty of the interconnectedness to your point is that if by exposing it, it only reaffirms yourself in understanding yourself. And if it does open the door to exploring what else could exist for me, how beautiful is that?
Absolutely. And I think as long as the message is rooted in, I don't want, I don't, I'm hesitant to use the word love, like love for humanity,
Yeah.
warmth and kindness and humility. Like those are all of the words and kind of the vibe, I guess, that we try to create through our episodes using audio. And I think as long as it's rooted in all those things, like things that children learn, I mean, it could just be a window to so many new amazing opportunities for them. It builds leadership skills. Oh my goodness. Like being able to work across different cultures and languages and cultural barriers. It's such an amazing leadership skill that you can develop. Even as scientists or on whatever business you plan to do, it is can't avoid it. We live in a multicultural world, no matter where you are. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's for sure. I will say that being someone who works with global companies and going in, there's so much leadership training that goes into how do you cultivate team connection and trust with team members that live around the world? People are living in Japan, in India, in Germany, and now suddenly someone from India or Japan, where hospitality and warmth and just like talking is such a big part. Talking to someone from German who's very direct and to the point, and now they have to understand that we're not disrespecting each other. We're understanding, oh, okay, my German
yeah.
colleague speaks this way because culturally that is what's considered respectful there versus what does respect look like in China, in Korea, in India, in Nigeria, wherever, Kenya. So it's like just that piece is just such a helpful part. And if a kid gets to learn from it from a young age, they're not having to struggle as an adult around that. I want to ask you for parents, teachers, and for the community members that are listening, what's one small action that they can take to help raise kids who are more curious, who are more empathetic, and who are more connected?
Yeah, I think making assumptions, and this is something that I'm like, this is my life work, and I still struggle with this, right? I think every person in the world, no matter how open minded and well traveled or whatever they are,
Absolutely.
but assumptions, and it's like the little comments that happen at home around someone's differences or socioeconomic. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but when we talk difference, not just cultural or religious, it's also socioeconomic, right?
Yep.
Differences that the assumptions that we make at home it might feel very innocent, but it does create a ripple effect and tremendous impact on a child's perspective, right? And so that's why I think our show is not just for little kids, it's for families as well, because this is a never ending learning experience, right? I learn from our guests all the time. Our guests will be like, actually, and they'll always, and it's, we should never stop learning about how other people live, how much diversity there is, and how people think around the world. And it's a never ending journey. And like, what would the world look like if we, and I said this before, but really it's a question that I wish we can all take a pause to think about. Like, what would our world look like if everybody really started that at home, right? This open-mindedness and not making assumptions about anybody, whether it's positive or good, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm a Korean American Asian person that is terrible in math. Like the highest level of math I did, I don't even remember.
I'll
Like it
join
was
you in that.
like it was my worst subject. I struggled hard, right? But it was, I don't want to say it was like tough, but people would just be like, "What's wrong with you? You're so bad at math. Like why?"
I
Um,
hate math. I always say me and
right?
math have we have a civil relationship, but we do not have a good one. And there's a reason I'm a psychologist. I am great with feelings. Do not bring numbers near me.
Yeah.
Like, do not want me as your CPA or accountant or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that every person, every family, like I said before, is so different. And second thing is, as parents, and this is something that I struggle with at my kids' schools, is become friends with other parents that may be different than you. I lived in New York City for 15 years, so my understanding of like diversity is very different from I think
Welcome
the
to the
rest of the
South
country.
Bay.
Right. Yeah. So we're in a school district where people will say it's pretty diverse, but I don't think so at all. And I do find that there's kind of like division between the different ethnicities, and there's not many like Asian families, in my opinion. And I would encourage parents to really try, because when the parents are friends, and when your kids at a certain age, obviously, like forget middle school and high school, right? But at least in elementary school, kids have play dates and have friends as long as their parents are friends,
Right.
right? Like everyone that we invited to my son's party are like, it's because I'm friends with the parents, right? So it's, I do want to encourage that, and I think it would make a big impact in a really
I
positive
love
way
that.
for your child to meet friends across different cultures and religions, socioeconomics. I think that's just it's such a wonderful experience that you can provide for your children.
I think that those two things that you just mentioned about taking action, right? Like not making assumptions, or at least trying as hard as you can not to, and catching yourself when you are, and building friendships across bridges of individuals and families or people that you normally wouldn't, because it's our nature to be around people who are like minded and familiar. I think those two things go so hand in hand, because by making friends that are of different communities, of socioeconomic backgrounds, it helps to really bring the reality of those experiences versus what you just read and learn on TV and digest theoretically. And it actually helps prevent those assumptions from happening. I
Yeah.
think that what you just mentioned, those two things are just so beautiful, and they go hand in hand for sure. So, with that, the final question I want to ask you is, what would be one reframed perspective that you want people to take away around culture, kids, and connection?
Coming from a parent, it's a tool for success.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Cultural education at an early age, tool
Mm-hmm.
for success. Hasn't been enough studies, but enough that educators should take it a lot more seriously. You know, everything we talked about before. It sets them up to be able to work with people of all backgrounds, not just culture, right? It raises their emotional intelligence. And I wish people, parents especially, would see it that maybe I'm biased, but it is one of the most important tools you can give to your child for success in the future,
Yeah.
academically, social, economic, in every shape or form. I really believe that. And every time we present like our nonprofit in the show, is they're like, oh, we've never seen anything like this. We've never heard of anything like this, right? And I think this is just the beginning, but I hope that the ripple effects will happen. And yeah, and just keep imagining that world, right? Keep imagining that world.
Amazing. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for coming and sharing about the beautiful work that you do for Culture Kids and the fact that your son gets to be your co-host and just exploring it from the eyes of a kid. You know, it makes so much sense for a parent-kid duo to be able to share this with the world. And I mean, 150 episodes in, you're just doing such remarkable work and such a strong mission. So thank you for so much for sharing all of this. Where can people find you, watch your show, and engage with you?
Yeah, any podcast platform, just type in Culture Kids. If you are a parent, we get majority of our downloads from Yodel Player, which is this phenomenal, like tiny little player for kids. It's audio only, 2 buttons. Your 3-year-old can play around with it. Very safe because it's all just vetted kids content. So Kids Listen. Kids Listen is another incredible resource for audio education as well. So yeah, we're everywhere.
I love it. Where you need to be. So thank you so much again, Kristen, for coming on. I can't wait for everyone to hear this and to take in all the knowledge that you're sharing through Culture Kids. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
I really hope that you enjoy this episode. And I just have one favor to ask you. If you could just make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rating and review, it's going to help us tremendously to make sure that we reach as many people as possible that you think should be listening to our episodes. I'll see you next week for another episode, and thank you so much for leaving that one review, that one subscription, and sharing this with your friends.